Thanks everybody for coming to our workshop. So what we would like to talk about today is some of the approaches that we use in our teaching that we believe empower students. And we believe that we empower them in their learning and in their development as graduates. So we're calling it, or we're describing it as a multi-leveled approach because we're going to talk about strategies that we use at 4 different levels. The first level is at the student level, and Helen will talk about that. The second level is at the course level, and I'll talk about course inclusion that I use. And then we're going to talk about, Helen's going to talk about the discipline level, and she's going to talk about an approach she uses, a community of practice approach that she uses with the teaching team. And then finally, I'll talk about empowerment at the program level. But of course, we don't want to make it all about us talking, so we really hope that this will inspire you to also share some of your ideas and some of your innovations as well. And as you can see, we've got butcher's paper there and time. So we're talking about empowerment. So what do we mean by student empowerment? Well, empowering students has been defined as creating an environment and creating tasks that focus on 4 important elements. And those elements are that students need to have tasks or need to see that what they're doing has got meaning. And they need to see that there is some sort of impact of what they're doing. And they need to see that they're developing some sort of competence with their tasks, and also that they have choice. And empowerment is strongly influenced by feedback and communication, and the fact that, trust, of course, is very important, and credibility, and of course we play a very important role as educators in that. So when we talk about the 4 different activities that we do, we're going to talk about them in this context, in this empowerment framework. So I'll hand you over to Helen now.
Okay, so the first approach was aimed at the student themselves. We're going to go deep into the student's consciousness and make them look. The idea was to get them to think about their approach to learning, their self-regulation of their learning, actually. So what we identified in our practice, we teach foundation year health, which is really lots of large courses with 900 students. And, one of the course that I teach is anatomy and physiology. And we have these beautiful laboratories, so rich in resources. We have human bodies, we have, posters, we have, all sorts of resources. And the students move around in groups and they go, oh, yeah, I know that. And they walk around. And so at the end of each session, we would run a quiz. And some students would, do really well. Others would not do very well. And there were these others, group of students that couldn't believe how badly they went. That disbelief, I can't believe that. I really think I knew it. And so I was discussing this with Natalie, and we thought, well, why don't we put a little confidence thing on the quiz? Circle how confident you feel at the beginning before you do the quiz. And Natalie had a look at it, she's fantastic with data, and she said, there are a group of students that feel confident, but actually perform really badly. And I thought, well, we've got to get to those students. They're not regulating their learning. They're really not on the planet, Everybody must have experienced those students, right? So I started doing some search in the literature to find out what this problem was, and it was about metacognition. Have you heard of that term? So it's being aware of your own cognition, being aware of your own learning. And it goes back beyond Flavel in 1979, it goes beyond that. In the 1700s, or 17th century, this Baruch Spinoza said, if somebody knows something, then he knows that he knows it, and at the same time, he knows that he knows that he knows it. Well, we come forward a few hundred years to a lesser known academic, myself, Some of my students don't know something, and at the same time they don't know that they don't know it, right? So we thought, okay, how are we going to capture these students and empower them? And I think one of the things was teaching them metacognitive skills, teaching them to be aware of their learning, teaching them to understand that they don't know it all, that they need to test themselves all the time as they're going through their learning. So what we came up with, well, this is Kolb's experiential learning little diagram. And so we have the planning of a task, monitoring, understanding, reaction to errors and reflection. This makes deep and autonomous learners. And I thought, well, let's try something like that with, getting the students to learn about their learning. And so we came up with this idea of a blank page. It's called the blank page technique. And we published on this, the blank page technique for learning anatomy, but it can be applied to a lot of any discipline really, okay? The one thing we did with this technique is that I wanted students to experience what it's like without resources, take them away, and a metaphorical blank page is in front of them. And so we made this little part of the laboratory, just no resources, all posters down, anything, all textbooks left behind. They go into this room for about 20 minutes, part of their practical session, and they're asked by the tutor to create, either on a whiteboard, or we used the medium of plasticine to create something, one of the bones or some physiological mechanism that they feel that they're having trouble with, to just try and create it. In that, we gave them 5 minutes to have a go. If they were really stuck, then they could have a look at their textbook, then come back in and try it again. And actually, we didn't know how it would work, but it really worked brilliantly, actually. And one of the things we do while they're in this room, why am I doing this? The tutor asks them these questions. Do I really own this knowledge? Ask yourself, do I really own this knowledge? And what are the deficiencies in my knowledge? These are the questions to make them think about their learning. So these are some of the things they came up with them making, drawing on the board and all this kind of thing with anatomy. And our results showed one of the most important things is it made me think. Wow, isn't that great if we can make the students think? I was so thrilled with that. So, this blank page technique, I wanted to show it to you as just an exemplar of something that you can do to make them feel, students start to realise the deficiencies in their learning and take control of it and regulate their learning. So, what I would like you to do is maybe share some examples that you have, or if you could just share in your groups things that you can do in your discipline or in your course that are similar to the blank page technique. So if we have a few minutes of discussion, and then we can come back with some ideas from each group, if that's okay. So I know it takes a moment to think about things, but just presenting them somehow with this blank page moment in your course.
Oh.
Yeah, I think we can put it together. It's a good idea to write stuff down.
Subject to master financial planning, and it bridges the gap between so what we do is we get the students when they come in, we follow them to do it. It's mainly similar to the thing we just talked about, instead of actually giving them what we think they need, get them to establish how they actually do things or how they first, and then build our coaching and facilitation around like an individual learning plan. So it kind of works. It's quite different. So, the day one, so they come in and they actually do an exercise where they build a hand for people who've lost a hand in war-torn countries. They don't realise what they do, when lots of distractions. And then in the afternoon, we do a session called Effective Presentations. We get them to present, and we take them out of financial planning, present on different topics, just to allow the creative side to come out. And then in the afternoon then, we simulate a client meeting where they actually sit in front of a real customer, a real client, and conduct a meeting as they would in their role. It's almost like they're projecting their role forward to our financial planning and conducting the meeting to kind of establish where their strengths are, the weaknesses are, and the opportunities to develop that. So what we're doing is we give an entire day that's not around the financial planning, essentially, to establish where they are as a financial planner, what they would be if they were a financial planner. The challenge is that we don't know what they don't know, and one of the key things that we find is that some people go in with this persona of what we actually encourage them to do is establish this kind of baseline of who you currently are as a financial planner in the academic world, and then we start to develop who you want to be as a financial planner in the real world. So it kind of just gives us that core competency. I think they find themselves a little bit on day one. This is the way I am. This is what I need to work on. We hate the term strengths, weaknesses. The term weakness implies you're not doing something. But we change that into one of the developmental areas. It's changing a lot of language as well. But it's mainly kind of them establishing who they are in this profession they want to follow, and them identifying what the development areas are, where their strengths are, and then we hone in on all those things and basically throw them deep in on day one. We've got another 2 weeks or 4 days to build on that before there's a real life financial platform. It kind of works. It works. It's challenging. It works.
For example, reading sugar, like you want to understand how the metabolism in our body. That's give an example like find out what kind of sugar content in the Coke and cat road or Pepsi or Coca-Cola or something else. Take 2 examples, find out which sugar in that one, find out which one is good for our body and why.
So it's kind of making it relevant to real life.
Yeah, so some of us are with black, then on sugar or the liquid.
Okay, is everybody want more time to discuss it anymore? Okay?
1 minute.
Oh, 1 minute, okay,
Some
sure.
of them don't know what is course or
They drink it every day. They don't label on it.
Give them some materials and as I
discuss it, so we can more things.
give them some
Based
comments
on that, they'll work it out.
then
So they're finding out
the creative part of that is that everyone comes up with something
that usually break down into glucose and fructose, and that will give more sweetness. And they're finding out new things.
Great.
Coming back to us. And some of them are struggling, so we give them, we just follow these chemicals and we'll get up there.
Cool.
That's just one example.
I could have a chemistry. Yeah, everything you just said. Great. For yourself?
What do you think about the but because it's for me it's a lecture, so
Okay, so we're going to start having some feedback session now.
but I give them simple
Hopefully you've had enough time to have just a couple of ideas. Okay, how about we start with this group here? Are you still on?
She's a curriculum writer. She's done
So we're listening to our group over here for some
Sure.
feedback. Yeah.
Just to give you a bit of background, Guy and myself are professional staff. We work with learning and teaching support, as does Tiana, but she has a dual role as a teacher as well. So we thought that we would look at this from the perspective of how could we help our colleagues design learning activities that would create an episode where students can practice, get something wrong and have another go.
Yeah.
One of the things that came out of that discussion also was how do we help illuminate the connections between the activity and why it is that they're doing it, or why it's going to connect to something else, or how it's going to help them in the future.
Oh, okay.
We discussed a number of different play-based activities. What I call play-based activities. So Di related an example where they were given different types of spaghetti and they had to construct something that stood up.
Yeah.
And we had ones that had different blocks and different shapes. And the idea was for students to work in groups and to create this something that stands up. But then what's the reason for doing that? So there then needs to be a debrief with the students to help them reflect. And one of the challenges for something like this is how do you set up your groups with your students? Do you let them self-select? Or from time to time, if you're going to run these kinds of things throughout the semester, do you actually move the groups around with you shifting students around so they have different strengths? And part of the debrief is what roles do they take on in the group? And what kind of knowledge do they and skill sets do they bring to bear? And how they work together.
And how that might relate to future employment.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Or in the workplace.
that's right, yeah. Well, I mean, group activity is very, much, they're training to work in a team and all that kind of thing. What we did we didn't sort of structure it in that way. We're sort of self-selecting in the groups because of, I don't know, we just didn't want to over-manage it, I suppose. And I think they felt a little bit intimidated anyway, going into this room and having to think and feeling self-conscious that maybe they don't know anything. And so they just kind of selected with people that they kind of knew, and they started to work that way.
You have to know your students very well and the strengths of each one if you wanted to. And it would depend on what you were doing, the outcome that you were wanting.
That's right.
If you actually selected different groups of differing strengths. As an example of if you were talking about diversity or strengthening teams, you could do that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Anyone else got something that they want to discuss? Yeah.
A bit of a different perspective, and just to give a bit of background, I'm not a lecturer. I actually work for AMP, the financial planning organisation, and our course, or the course that we run, is actually a skills-based course that's now a subject in the Master of Financial Planning subject that's offered by Griffith University. So it's interesting because we get people coming in every 6 weeks. They do 3 weeks online, 3 weeks face-to-face, and once they do it, they get the skills component for that program, and we throw them in the deep end, basically. So the day one they come in for the residential block, they come in expecting to do all these financial planning kind of skills things and learn about superannuation, investments, insurance. And day one is very much everything other than financial planning. So day one, we give them a team building exercise where they realise halfway through they're building hands for people that have lost hands in war-torn countries. So they do a charity event, which they find very moving. It's all about them not so much doing a charity thing, but establishing their purpose and feel-good factor, because financial planning is very much about the why. And then we do a session in the afternoon where they actually come up and present to us as coaches on topics that are completely unrelated to financial planning. A bit of an improvisation session, such as tell us what really happened to dinosaurs, give us the weather forecast in Europe or wherever. And then in the afternoon, then we put them in front of actors to establish their kind of baseline around how they would conduct a client meeting if they were a financial planner. So it's very much about them kind of developing the skills they need without realising they're developing the skills they need. And then at the end of the day, when they do their role play, they're kind of establishing their baseline of what strengths they've got to take to a role, what kind of opportunities they've got to develop, and all that sort of stuff. So without even realising they're doing it, they're figuring out who they are in the world in a course that actually bridges the gap between academic land and the not obviously the real world, but the actual workforce outside of it.
Is that ever explicitly told to them, or do they just come up with that themselves?
They come up with it themselves.
Yeah.
So we're not telling them what they need to do in a client meeting, or what they need to do in a fact-find meeting, or what they need to do when they talk to clients. We're getting to figure it out for themselves and then develop those skills, because one of the problems with the financial planning industry over the last 20 years, and you always see the bad news in the press, is you're told that it's got to be done this way, got to be done this way, and got to be done this way. And I think the one thing that's always lacked is the human factor.
Yeah.
And the one thing we're trying to do is get these people to take their own personality into what they do, and then work on the skills. We even changed a lot of the language you use. It's not strengths and weaknesses anymore. because we don't have to think that there's a weakness or something that they need to actually change. We call it sort of development opportunities. And then we sort of apply a 360-degree feedback mechanism in the program as well, and change the program every time on sort of common themes, and it works.
So that
really well.
first session is really like a blank page.
It is. It is. That's why I really resonated with what you said with the blank page. I thought we can't do that,
Yeah.
and I kind of related back to what we do on day one, because I wouldn't say we throw them in the deep end in the sense of, there you go, because they come to the residential component terrified.
Yeah.
But this is the career path I've chosen. But it's kind of also reinforcing that you come with a set of skills already.
Yeah.
Keep those skills.
That's right.
Let's just work on the stuff that you want to develop further, and that will then add to what you already know. You're already kind of, I don't want to use the term half cooked. You're already half cooked, but you kind of let's
Yeah.
get you fully cooked.
Great. Anybody else got something that they want to add from their perspective? Blank page episode? Yeah.
I work in a studio-based situation, so I work at QCA, so maximum students at any one time is 18. So it's very, very intense and hands-on, and I teach first year and second year students. And first year students commonly come into the studio and they'll say, fear all over their faces. Look at, the torches, the equipment. I've never done this before. And I say, well, that's why it's called introduction. Right? Because most people have done drawing or painting at school, or they might have done some ceramics or sculpture, but it's pretty unlikely they've done anything with metal. So we have that little hurdle to get over, and then we have I love the blank page idea, but it's not appropriate because you can't, the things that we are developing skills in, you need so many tools and equipment right from the very beginning. So we're very much about embedding skills, but it's that you do a demonstration, you say, I've been, and they'll say, how long have you been making work? And I say, oh, over 30 years. And then they resentfully say later on in the morning, you made that look really easy. I can't do it. It's your first day. So I have to get over that hurdle. So I'm not sure. I'd love there to be a way I can make them understand that, and to respect that they're, whatever their age is, whether they're school leavers or whether they're retired and they're coming back to learn, but actually this has been my career. I've had my own business for over 20 years. I lecture. I've got good skills in this area. Don't think you can come in and do this straight away. It's about repetition. It's about embedding skills. It's about keeping on working at it and ticking away at it and making lots of mistakes. And that's the best way to learn.
I mean, you could bring in something maybe like a little bit down the track with a kind of a blank page episode.
Yes,
and they realise what they don't know and all that kind of.
Yes, because they don't know what they don't. They absolutely don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And they don't have any awareness that they don't know.
Yeah, that's right. Anyone else got a perspective before we move on?
Thanks, Helen. We had a question about what point in the semester this was happening. Presumably not
It was right in the beginning.
the first lesson. What
Oh,
level are they?
they were 2 weeks into
So their
the course.
first year.
Their first year. And they, we want them, we had to get onto it really quickly, and it's we really don't make it too threatening. We just say, oh, we want you to, to experience what it's like without resources. And, so they start right from the beginning, and then they build up, they get used to the idea, and then I think, well, through that, they start to realise, they start to develop metacognitive skills. That's the outcome, that's the aim of the whole episode. So,
Have you actually tested how well it does change their metacognitive skills?
well, we did an experiment with some students going in and doing typical review questions, and some going into the blank page, and the outcome in the quizzes was the same attainment, but students felt that the actual blank page experience was more fun, and it made them think, and they, this is sort of a bit boring doing review questions and like so that was the other aspect.
Their attention too, because when you're experiencing the moment, that sticks with you.
Exactly, emotional learning, yeah, exactly. Anyway, thank you for that part. We're going to move on now. Natalie's going to talk about the next stage, the next level, because we've got these levels to get through. So we're just hoping that we can seed an idea, and then we can, with all these levels that you can take home.
So I wanted to talk about how I've used case studies in my course as a curriculum inclusion in a first year course. So has anyone, or do you use case studies at all? Yeah. Well, for me, I found it was really important to use case studies in my course because I teach first year genetics and it's foundation genetics, and of course there's a lot of molecular concepts that students need to learn, and I felt that it was important to use case studies because then they can see that connection with the real world, and they're going to be health professionals, and surprisingly those molecular concepts will come up again in their work. And of course, the other thing about case studies is that I knew that it could help them develop skills, analytical skills, and that was important as well. But my concern, I suppose, was that these are first year students, and I was worried how they would handle these case studies. And I didn't want to use the case studies that I wrote myself, and I didn't want to use the case studies that you get off the web, the written case studies, because they just didn't feel real to me. I wanted students to experience the reality of real life health problems. So I had to think about where I was going to source those case studies. And I had to think about an approach that I was going to use, because if I wanted really the case studies to be used to help students connect what they were learning, but I also wanted to develop some analytical skills, but from first year approach, because I knew that in second and third year they would get a lot of case studies, and they would be quite complex case studies, and they would need to be able to analyse them and that type of thing. So it was like a little primer for them. And of course, delivery and assessment was a bit of a challenge as well, because I've got this massive class, which are about 400 students, and the lectures are about 200 student size, and my tutes are 200 student size, so I don't have small tutes at all. I don't have nice rooms like this. It's just in the lecture theatre. So, and of course how they were going to be assessed, because students, when they see a complex case study, of course, get very stressed because they think, do we have to diagnose this? Do we have to know the details? Good grief. So basically what I did for my source for the case studies, I used PubMed. So PubMed is a great source if you want biomedical literature, and there are fantastic case reports on PubMed. So I used real cases, and a lot of the real cases, of course, had fabulous imagery and that type of thing. So, and of course, they were usually very complex. And then I thought about, well, what sort of approach was I going to use? Was I going to use an open-ended approach so that students had to solve a problem? That didn't really appeal to me because I felt that would be too difficult for students to do. I thought it would be more important to use a directed approach. So I had the story of the scenario, which of course was the study, was the case report that they had. But I wrote some very carefully chosen closed-ended questions so that students could then relate what they'd just been learning in the topic back to the case study. So for each topic, there's 12 topics in the course. Most topics had one of these case studies at the end of the topic. And it was very much controlled by me. So what I did was I provided the information about the cases in the course curriculum. And those questions were also carefully written and provided in the curriculum as well, so that students had time to think about them. So unfortunately, we didn't have much choice. We had to discuss them in lectures, so they were just part of a lecture, at the end of a lecture. And sometimes they would flow over into a tutorial. Sometimes they would flow over into the discussion board. And I wrote very, very clear learning objectives around them. So students realised that they weren't going to be assessed on all that complexity, all that detail. They were going to be assessed on the learning objectives, on the key points of the case. So I guess I called it an integrated case study approach because I chose the cases, I very carefully chose them, but they were real life. And of course I understood that they could be complex, but I used them to illustrate certain concepts that they'd been learning in that topic. And I wrote very clear learning objectives around them. That was really important. And I mostly had very much directed types of questions, but then I started bringing in, from topic to topic, they sort of got a little bit more confidence with them, I started bringing in a few more open-ended questions, a few more analytical questions. So that's why I guess I call it an integrated approach. I encouraged them, I guided them, but I tried as much as possible to keep out of it a little bit if I could. And in some cases we were able to revisit them in later topics because some cases had elements that then were covered in further topics. And the students, I found they did really well with them. In the beginning, of course, they were very shy about the whole idea and they were just nervous because it seemed, wow, this complex situation here. But as the course went on, they realised that they could start to look at a very complex scenario and actually relate what they'd learned. They could start to analyse it in detail. And it was actually very impressive, I must say. I was very happy with it. And as long as they knew that what the expectations were based on the learning objectives that I'd written, they felt okay, they felt confident, they weren't nervous, they weren't worried about the exam, having to know all this detailed information. So I wanted to know if they were effective, so I was interested in seeing if they were meaningful for the students. So these are some of the comments that I got from the students, and it was pretty clear to me that they found a lot of meaning in the cases. And it was nice to hear that one student said that they were a treat at the end of the lecture, which was really good. I was very impressed with that. But I also wanted to see, competence was another thing I was interested in. I wanted to see if it was helping them develop competence with analytical skills and being able to handle, one way I looked at it was to be able to handle multiple choice questions that were higher order thinking, that I would call synthesis and analysis types of questions. Yeah. So in I'm comparing 2011 and 2014. So 2011 is before I had the case studies in the course. And 2014 is when I had the case studies, but I had the same sort of cohort. Cohorts changed a little bit since after then. And so you can see in 2011, the multiple choice questions were mostly knowledge types of questions. There are a few synthesis and analysis types of questions, but they got just over 70%. That was the mean, the average of the multiple choice question results. In 2014, when I introduced the case studies, I started gradually increasing the types of multiple choice questions that I would consider higher order. And I sort of gauged it a bit throughout the course as well, because I put some of these questions in as critical thinking questions in the lectures to see how the students would handle them. I didn't want to just sort of, bombard them with these complex questions and they, it would sort of stress them out. But I thought they could handle it, and they did. So you can see nearly a third of the questions were higher order questions, and they did almost as well in 2014. So I felt that I was quite happy. I felt that they were quite successful. So what I thought we could do is to have a bit of a talk about it, think about, you might already use case studies, think about a topic or a course that you might want to use, thinking about the benefits and challenges, but think about the source that you use for your case study. So if you write the case studies, think about if it's possible that you might be able to find a source that has authentic real-life situations.
Can I just ask, because you said you took the cases from real journal articles.
Yes.
Did you present them to the students within the context of the journal article, or did you take the information from the journal article?
Within the context of the journal article. Yeah, but it wasn't the whole journal article. So I took certain information from the journal article. It was certainly they knew that it was in the context of the article, and it was a case report. Yeah. So of course they had the link to it, so they could read the whole article if they wanted to. What type of approach you might use? If you use a directed approach, would you think about more of an open-ended approach? Do you think students could handle it, or you might use an open-ended approach? What about delivery and assessment? Because for me, of course, my delivery was very restricted. I didn't have much choice. There was no group work around it, really. And assessment was, of course, based on learning objectives, very carefully written learning objectives that I had written for these first-year students. So I thought you might be able to give us some ideas too. Tell us some ideas.
So I think we can apply this across all three disciplines, chemistry, environment, science, financial programming, but also I'm actually fighting the anthropology, so when
And also applying the theories that I've learned to the case study. So I imagine that there's loads
Let's use your example. Right, so you've got Coke, Pepsi, Sprite, orange juice. And the reason I say orange juice is I actually did my orange thing on orange juice on L-ascorbic acid. Yes, yeah, that's a real life example.
That was a very good idea.
So, benefit.
Look at the reference, it's very well.
It's basically a job, a job ready. Benefit
Basically, the one that I'm looking at, she had not turned on. No, that's what I mean. And he didn't have a job.
Sorry to cut it short, everyone. We're just looking at the time, realising we've got things to talk about. So we're a bit short on time. So, anyone got any ideas for something a bit different they'd like to do with case study?
normally you get them in June.
We actually use a case study in our program, but we actually use real life clients with obviously changing the names and stuff. I was actually just discussing the fact that I'm doing a Bachelor of Medical Science at the moment through Charlestown University, which is completely unrelated to finance. And I struggled with genetics in my first year because there were no case studies.
Right.
And I found genetics to be a complete brain explosion because I didn't do any of the biology in school. And my lecturer is a great lecturer, but it was all theory of genetics.
It's all molecular.
Tell us Tay-Sachs disease, for example, and then talk about the genetics of Tay-Sachs disease without getting the students involved in the whole thing. We had a great example on this table, move away from finance, that in tutorials using real life examples. So I'm thinking of what you're saying there from a chemistry perspective, get the student to think about how chemistry is applied in the real world. Sugars, for example, Coke, Pepsi, Sprite, orange juice. Some of the benefits there, they can relate to what they're studying back to the real world and how they integrate what they study, because I think there's often a fear that what they're studying is not relevant in the real world. How they can relate that back to, oh, well, there's sugar in Coke, sugar is chemistry. It makes it easier to understand, relevant, it bridges the gap between academia and the workforce, makes it fun for students, but I think one of the biggest challenges is, anyone that reads academic journals is for a first year student or even a third year student like myself, And there's a lot of stuff in there you just go, what does that actually mean? So,
True, but if you present it this way, so if you take the information from the journal, you can access to the journal, obviously. But take the information from it, and then I will have, say, a few sentences, and then I'll ask them a question about that, and then a few more, ask them a question. And so it does. They can they can see. Actually, this makes sense to me. I can read this.
well, I liked your approach earlier. You said that you kind of start off with the kind of simplicity, and then as they go through and get more confidence, you kind of start to throw a few curveballs their way, and it builds confidence. And I'm seeing a lot of applications of this stuff because they don't realise they're building confidence until they're kind of building confidence, and they're kind of there.
Sometimes, to illustrate a point, I know one particular situation I illustrate a point, is I have an image of, well, it's very complex, but it's diagnosing a very complex disease, and talks all about the disease, describes the image down the bottom. And then I go through the image and I go, you know that, you know that, you know that, tell me that. Yeah, we go through, and this very complex thing, the students actually can tell me all the stuff about it that they've learned throughout the course. And they're like,
It's kind of like what they do in medicine, really, isn't it? With junior doctors, you kind of
It's
you're there speaking to patients and kind of learning as you're doing.
yeah. Anybody else?
I have a question about how that impacts down track case study. We all teach down track. And one of the things that we've found is that when expectations of case studies early on get changed, unless you know that's happened, which is helpful to know, then students' expectation of how the next level of case study would go, that they'll revert back to that and go, oh, why isn't it like this great thing I did last year? That setting expectations around how you would solve case studies is different at different levels.
Well, I do know some of the teachers who do use case studies in high levels, and I know that they are very explicit with what the expectations are. And we talk about what we do at the different levels. So I think, I can see your point. I think, hopefully, we handle that quite well.
It's a program.
It's a program thing, really, yeah.
Dialogue and all.
But it is that thing to make sure that we're all, if we are embedding case studies, that we are doing that.
I suppose we should really move on because we're a bit short on time.
Yeah.
So
Okay, I'll just quickly talk about the next level, which was a course or discipline level approach to empowering the students. Now, this was about another activity we did in foundation year health across all the courses. There's many programs that feed into foundation year, and they do a similar first year program. And so we have all these tutors, all these laboratories, 900 students in some courses, and so we have a really big tutor workforce. And we found that we were getting these tutors that didn't really, our vision of the course and how it should be taught wasn't being translated into reality, because they had been taught by tutors that probably weren't that good at doing what they were doing, and so they just inherit these bad habits. And so while there's a generic university-wide tutor training program, we didn't feel, as course conveners, that it was actually suiting our learning environment, which is in the laboratory situation, and everybody's got different unique learning environments. And so what we did is we published on this last year a peer observation program for laboratory tutors, really just geared at targeting the laboratory tutors. And what we did was took the the pro-teaching program that's university-wide, and we just really scaled it back and simplified it for our tutors. And so what they did, we got them to sign up at novice tutors when they first came in to teach in the courses. We created a spreadsheet, we got them to sign up and agree to being observed and to observe a peer. And then one of the course conveners was also there. And so we'd meet for coffee afterwards and talk about how this was in a very supportive environment. It wasn't like you didn't do this or whatever, it was just very, very supportive. And what we've found is that the tutors have developed this community of practice. Now they've become more of a team, and initially they don't sort of say much at these little debriefing sessions, but now they sort of, towards the end, they start talking more and they're more confident about things that they do. So this was a little play. We have an induction workshop at the beginning, and then they form a triad. So that's a person, two peers, and an expert, which is the course convener. And then we have one observation session, we have feedback, and then they have another one, and then a final feedback at the end. And this is just one little video we took, because we had a teaching and learning grant to do this. It's only 2 minutes, so I'll just show you. This is one tutor.
Partially, I believe my expectations have been met. I found initially I was expecting students to be very interactive, ask questions, be prepared, but then I had a few situations where most of my students didn't do the tutorial questions, just weren't eager to ask questions. I couldn't gauge where their learning was at. It was very hard for me to kind of teach them. A main reward would definitely be getting asked a question and not only just answering that question, but also making sure that they can understand that particular concept that I've taught them. That is a really great reward for me. So for a challenge, it would be with the situation I had with a lady. She asked me a question, and I tried very hard to answer it in all different areas. I gave her an example, I referred her to the material, I asked if that answered her question. She back-chatted to me, and I got very flustered and wasn't expecting that to happen. She then just walked away saying that I didn't answer her particular question. That really got to me. An important resource would definitely have to be the textbook. But another useful resource that I've found is also to see how different students or even different tutors approach a particular question. I really like to see that, because then if a student is not understanding the way I'm teaching them, I can refer to that as well. Very much so. Yeah, I really like it. And the particular peer observation. I was very nervous at the start, but then after a while I really got used to it and I like it. I find it's helpful.
Okay, so that was one tutor's feedback on this program. And, you know, a lot of them gave beautiful feedback after being in this peer observation program, and we just, every year we just roll it out, and it's just, you know, it really improves the way they are engaging with the students.
It's like a little a mini teacher's prac for tutors.
Yeah, it is. That's what it is.
Observation, feedback, supportive.
Exactly.
That tutor looks about 12 years old.
I know. She's not. She's about 25.
Yeah, but sometimes it could account for the back chat.
Exactly, but it's also a beautiful, rich way of getting the students to. They talk to near peers a lot easier than what they do to old bags, you know, like me. But so they, you know, it was a really good program. Now, I just sort of wanted to share that with you. If you've got any comments, because we're going to move on now because lunch is waiting. Yeah.
Helen, did you pay the tutors for the extra time to do peer review?
No.
So they voluntarily did that?
They voluntarily did that. And, you know, I suppose people might think, we get a lot of requests to be tutors in our foundation year from medical students and postgrad students. And so we say, well, you know, we kind of have expectations, like we want you to be part of the peer observation program. It's an extra, you know, couple of hours, you know, over the semester, a few hours over the semester. And we kind of sort of say it's an expectation, but we don't say it is. And they do get involved with it, and they benefit from it. And even the more experienced tutors like it too, because they can feel like they're giving some feedback as well, so it's really
Some of
good.
their feedback is fantastic.
Some of the feedback is
Yeah.
fantastic, yeah, really, it is, so, you know. Okay, so any other comments with that one? You may be able to do it with your tutors, yeah?
So these tutors, sorry, maybe I missed that. So are they students that have done the courses already?
Yeah,
So they're still undergraduate students?
No, they're all postgraduate students, yeah. Some medicine students and postgraduate honours, PhD students.
So you don't have any of the third year students, for example?
No, I think
helping
that's
out?
policy, they have to have a degree before they can become a tutor. All right, any other comments about that? Because I know you're probably dying to have some lunch, but we're just going to ask you what you could do with your tutors if you've got some ideas, but that's a nice little activity. So we're kind of going through the levels. I hope you can see that. We're starting with the student, we're going, with the teacher and student, now the discipline level, and the final thing that Natalie's going to just cap off with is the program level. So I'll hand you over to Natalie, and it'll take us to the end of the session today. So it won't be too much longer, another 5 minutes maybe.
So, I'm the Bachelor of Biomedical Science Program Director, and I really want to talk about what I call the journey to Griffith 2020, because this certainly was a bit of a journey. It started off with
Drinks in your
drinks
office?
in the office. Well, that was just after we heard about the academic provost's discussion paper. So we teach Foundation Year Health, and we've both been involved in Foundation Year Health since about 2007, since it started. We've been involved in a course each, as well as basically developing a lot of the lab program and running the lab program. It was our very first job, wasn't it? And of course we heard about this new idea of this Griffith model idea with the trimesters, and the idea of this flexibility for the students and a lot more choice for the students. So we thought, well, good grief, how on earth are we going to do this? How on earth is this going to impact Foundation Year Health? Foundation Year Health is delivered to about 19 programs. These programs will take for about 6 to 8 of these courses. These are how the courses are in semester 1 and semester 2. The first 3 are prerequisites for the second 3. So, how is this going to work? So, one night, Friday night, we had a couple of vodkas in Mum's office. We started thinking, because we knew this so well. We knew the program so well. And we came up with this.
That's what a vodka can do.
Psychedelic drugs.
This is our flexible learning wheel. And so basically, to sort of try and describe it quickly, how it works is that the 4 courses in semester 1, so semester 1, courses T1, T2, T3. So the 4 courses were to be repeated again, not all 4, one of them, 1002, was to be repeated in T3, but the other 3 were to be repeated the following trimester, and then these 3 courses were then to be repeated in the following trimester here.
In intensive mode.
In a different mode. So intensive mode, so 2 of them were in intensive mode, so 6 weeks in a flipped style, and then one of them was to be over 12 weeks but a flipped style. And we also had this idea of a flexi mode, so that students could basically work online using the standard mode to a degree, but do the labs at the end so they could do more online at home. Because the whole idea was flexibility, so students could have different ways of engaging. But that's what we came up with. And it fit really well with Biomed. So when you look at Biomed, this is the program, basically what it did was it allowed students to come in T2, which was never possible, and also it allowed students who might have failed. So once a student failed something in T1, they had to go back and do it in year 2. But it allowed them to catch up. And it also allowed students to spread out their load, try different modes. So how do we do it? So how do we make it happen? So we spoke to our Deputy Head of School Teaching and Learning, other staff in the Foundation Year, and we did some tweaks. They gave us some ideas to do some tweaks. We put in a bid for the was it $2 million or $20 million? All that money that apparently was available, we put in a bid for $500,000 of it. We were successful. And then we established a team. It was a big team. Ourselves, obviously, head of school, teaching, learning, and the health ideas team. People who had transition role, curriculum advisor role, success advisors. We had admin team as well. And of course we had to recruit staff to then deliver those courses, those intensive mode and mixed mode courses. And we needed to develop resources because they were flipped style, so there were many different resources needed. And we needed to evaluate it to show, give evidence that it was worthwhile for the university to spend their money on it, basically. So resource development was involved, of course, these online mini lectures, so they had to be developed, they had to be scripted, they had to be recorded, they had to be uploaded. And there were quizzes involved with them so that the students were encouraged, I suppose, a quiz after watching it, were encouraged to watch them and not come along to the tutorials, not having watched the pre-lab the mini lectures. And the convener had to produce videos, we had to produce style of learning videos because students weren't used to this style of learning, this sort of flipped mode style of learning, particularly the intensive mode, 6 weeks, so 12 weeks of content over 6 weeks. Workbooks, ladder manual, had to be lots of resources on learning at Griffith, so it was quite a big job. We started in semester 1, 2016. We trialled it in semester 2, 2016. It was a rocky road. It was a really rocky road.
That's really fast.
That is.
Oh,
I know.
Oh my God.
I know.
know.
It's remarkable.
Certainly age. So what were our challenges? Well, resistance. When we first presented this at our school meeting,
That'll never work.
never worked. It was a lot of resistance. But gradually when people could see it was happening, we got to talk, we went and saw all the program directors who were involved in it, explained it to them. People started coming around, and of course, when we were successful with the funds, they came around a bit quickly, didn't they? Yeah, so of course, you can imagine timetabling, getting the different sort of venues to have these this flip style, tutorial style. Forget the lecture theatres, we needed tutorial venues. Time frame was really important because the fact that the results from the subs and deferred exams had to be out in enough time for students if they failed to enrol in these second delivery courses. We had no idea how many students would enrol, did we? No idea.
I was sort of having an ulcer because I thought, what if there's only 10 students that actually enrol in T, in the year?
Yeah.
But we ended up getting 120 or something enrolled.
And of course, preparing the students for this style of learning, like we're thinking, okay, so if they don't engage after 2 weeks, if they do an intensive mode, then a third of the course is over. You know what? Heck. So early outreach was really important, and the Health Ideas team played a big role there. So, who enrolled? So we found that we've got 3 courses. One's completed, another 2 are nearly complete. So we found that for this particular course, Cells, Tissues and Regulation, there were mostly new students, more new students, but certainly the repeat fails enrolled as well. For Biomed, I could see that it allowed new students came into the program in the second semester, which was not possible prior. Bachelor of Health Science even more so. And different programs, smaller numbers of students enrolled. Some programs it wasn't possible because of the way the program was structured. This is chemistry of biological systems. Again, Bachelor of Exercise Science, few of them don't do too well in chemistry, as you can see, and we had quite a few repeat fails there. It's still quite a number of new students enrolled. Biomed, for example, again, Health Science was the biggest one. And this one is Helen's course, an admin physiology one, the repeat of Helen's course, and lots of health science. A number of repeat fails, but more new students than repeat students.
So can I ask, in terms of your load, and how you're going to be bringing these courses and what you're doing is clearly you won't do it over 3 trimesters.
Yeah, we don't convene the courses. There are staff members, new staff members who convene the courses, yes.
We just sort of moderate,
Mm.
so that there is certain addition to our workload.
It is certainly an addition, yes, but we don't convene the courses yet. So what do the students like about it? The students certainly like the fact that they had choice and they had this flexibility, but they really liked the fact that they had these weekly face-to-face tutorials and they got to know the teaching staff. They really liked that. So they could ask questions. It was like real-time feedback. They would look at the mini lectures and then they would try the questions out, and if they didn't get, they could get help straight away. Basically, they got feedback on how they were going. They liked that it was fast-paced with the intensive, the 6 weeks, but of course that created challenges for them because they had to be so onto their time management and they had to be so organised and to keep focused. And they may have been doing a 6-week course along with another 12-week course. So you can imagine it was only possible to do a standard load. It was not possible to overload the way it was worked out. But nevertheless, 6 weeks was pretty full on. Some of them were doing another course. But the outcomes, so you can see this is the SEC. We only have an SEC for one course that's completed the very first 6-week course, and that it was good, 4.5 out of 5, so that's a good one. And the outcomes, so how did the students fare? So the exam was, the content and the exam was all moderated, and the marking was moderated to make sure that it was consistent with the original delivery of the course. And more students got a 7, which was good to see. They're quite similar results otherwise. So it's sort of, the results moved up a little bit. We don't have, some results haven't come out by then, so I don't have anything there. So we're pretty happy with it. We think it's sort of basically fared better than what we hoped. And we're really hoping, as you can imagine, that the executive also agrees, because of course this needs to be funded. Continuing, yes.
So that's our program.
That's it, that's the program level. So thank you very much, everybody.